Welcome back to Off the Deaton Path. I'm your host, Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society, and we welcome you to this podcast for the week of October 9th, 2025. My very special guest today is journalist Tom Johnson. Tom has had a remarkable career in journalism that spanned 5 decades, and he has now written a memoir about it all that has been published by the University of Georgia Press. Tom is a native of Macon, Georgia, where he worked at the Macon Telegraph. He earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia's Henry W. Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication and a master's from Harvard Business School. Tom was chosen in the inaugural class of White House Fellows in 1965 during the administration of Lyndon Johnson, where he worked directly under White House Press Secretary Bill Moyers. The fellowship led to a series of positions on the staff of President Johnson, including Deputy to Press Secretary George Christian, Special Assistant to the President, and Executive Assistant to former President Johnson in Austin, Texas. It also, of course, made him an eyewitness to many, many historical events. He later became Executive Vice President of the LBJ family's Texas businesses, including a CBS television affiliate in Austin, AM and FM radio stations, and cable television franchises. Following President Johnson's death in 1973, Tom was named editor and in 1975 publisher and chief executive officer of the Dallas Times-Herald. Under Tom's leadership, the Times-Herald was named by Time magazine as one of the 5 best newspapers in the South. In 1977, LA Times publisher Otis Chandler selected Tom as president and chief operating officer of the Los Angeles Times. 3 years later, Chandler promoted him to publisher and chief executive officer, the first non-Chandler family member to be named to that position. Under Tom's leadership, the LA Times reached record levels of circulation, profitability, and revenues. It also received 6 Pulitzer Prizes. In 1990, Ted Turner recruited Tom to become president of CNN. He began work on August 1st, 1990, the day before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. CNN's live exclusive coverage of the 1991 war with Iraq propelled the 24-hour news channel into millions of homes worldwide and earned CNN virtually every award in broadcast and cable journalism. In 2001, at age 60, Tom retired from CNN. He serves now as chairman emeritus of the board of the Lyndon B. Johnson Foundation and a member of the board of visitors of the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. He has served on a number of national boards during his career and has received a number of awards, including the Horatio Alger Award, the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism, and the highest honor of the Radio and Television News Directors Association, the Paul White Award. In 2006, he received the John Gardner Legacy Leadership Award by the White House Fellows for Lifetime Achievement in Public Service. His memoir that he is here to talk about with me is entitled Driven, A Life in Public Service and Journalism from LBJ to CNN, published on October 1st of this year by the University of Georgia Press. I should tell you that my audio in this podcast is somewhat distorted due to technical issues with my microphone that we were unaware of when we recorded the podcast, and for that I apologize. We were also only minimally able to fix my part of the podcast. Most importantly, however, Tom Johnson's audio is fine, and he, of course, is the star of this show. My conversation with Tom Johnson begins now. Tom Johnson, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Stan.
It's a pleasure to meet you at long last. In conversation before, I told you I was a Grady grad, where you went to school, and you were sort of held up to us as what a Grady grad could be. I don't know that any of us ever reached the pinnacle that you did. You have recently written your memoir called Driven, A Life in Public Service and Journalism from LBJ to CNN. It will be published in October by the University of Georgia Press. Before we get into your life, tell me about what it was like to recall all of this and get it down on paper.
It was a 7.5-year experience, interrupted to some extent by procrastination, interrupted by COVID, and also interrupted by the time it took for me to get my own notes declassified, notes that I had taken in the White House particularly of national security meetings that had such high level classifications that it really took me a while to get those notes. But it was a fascinating but difficult. I say fascinating because I had retained so many of my notes after they were declassified. I had been thinking about a book, but I'd never reached the point of just saying, I'll do it. Initially, my wife had went and says, you have stories you should tell. And that was a positive, but it wasn't enough. So several months later, she came back and said, you have stories to tell that your granddaughters need to know. And that did it. I have two granddaughters. One's a young journalist. But I then started on this. And I mean, it really has been a journey, an adventure different from any other. I've only had written one other book, and that was a book at Harvard Business School titled Automating America's Newspapers, Nimrod Press. But that was I co-authored that with Lee Moore, a classmate of mine, and it really was my first and only book prior to this. I'm very pleased now that I did it. I've worked so hard to make sure that it's an honest book that is as accurate as I can make it, that it is a story of inside the room experiences that maybe have not been told by other authors or may not be told by other authors, because sometimes I was the only person inside the room with LBJ, and at times with Otis Chandler or even Ted Turner. But what made it so tough is it really was about me. And I think I could have written about you, Stan, more easily than I did about me.
Well, you've always been the journalist writing about other people or recording what they did. It is a remarkable career, Tom, and began in Macon, Georgia. And I wondered if there were times when you were sitting in those rooms in Washington, D.C., taking classified notes, and you thought to yourself, this is a long way from Macon, Georgia. How did I get here? Did you ever stop and ask yourself that? I know you were going 100 miles an hour driven, as the title of this is.
I did think about that. I also have never forgotten the earliest words from my mother, Josie Johnson. She said, Tommy, if you work hard and do right, you can become whatever you hope to become in life. Work hard, do right. I can assure you, in 83 years, starting very early, I have worked hard, perhaps too hard, and I have done my best to do right. But as with all people, I have my share of mistakes along the way. But yes, there were times when I would think about it, and how fortunate I was to have champions that enabled me to have the experience I did. And I have tried my best to be mentor to others and to be helpful to others who were trying to get their starts and to make it. And I take particular pride in a number of people that I have worked with. And I really am indebted to the University of Georgia. I mean, there was a wonderful experience at Grady College. It was a wonderful experience there in terms of meeting the woman that became my wife, in terms of honors that I achieved. Throughout this whole journey, Stan, I've always felt it better for me to receive praise than a raise. And I think there was something about the early praise from those editors of the Macon Telegraph, and then the praise that came to me from Peyton Anderson, and then from the professors at the Grady College, that really made such a huge difference. And it gave me a sense of confidence and a sense that I could, in fact, make it.
Did it keep you from having what so many of us have is, imposter syndrome? You look around and you think, boy, they're going to find out who I am pretty soon and make me go away and stop doing this. They'll find out I don't know what I'm talking about. Did you suffer from that at all? Or did you feel confident from the word go?
There was a point in my life when I saw a play. The first half of the play was what we present to the world, the image that we present to the world. And the second half of the play was who we really are. And that play had a big influence on me.
Hmm.
I have really tried my best to be who I am. And I should also just say, I do not want other people to become the workaholic that I became. And in all of my conversations with young people, I say, working hard is a key to success, but also you must balance that out with play. I might balance that out with sports, balance it out with things that are fun for you to do. Don't become the workaholic that I did.
And you certainly put in the hours, and we can start with this or not. I wanted to start with Peyton Anderson because he was, I think, one of your first mentors, but
Yes.
you worked up close and personally with probably the greatest workaholic in history in Lyndon Johnson. I don't know that there was any way you could have done what you did in the White House during the years 1965 to 69 without being a workaholic. Was there?
No, there was no way. And LBJ was described by some as a statesman. LBJ was not a statesman. LBJ was a professional politician,
Mm-hmm.
the finest sense of the word. That word is not held in highest regard these days, but he believed in doing today what was necessary to do today. He had very little patience about waiting for tomorrow. He wanted us to make sure that the letters that came in were answered the day that they arrived, if possible, that the request of the White House, not just members of Congress, but others to the extent possible, that we responded to them as rapidly as possible. He also felt that we never should punish anybody because a congressman might vote against us on a bill today. He would say, we will need his vote tomorrow on some other issue. Wayne Morse from Oregon was a congressman that almost always voted against us on Vietnam, but he would almost always vote for us on civil rights and voting rights. And LBJ was a really good teacher too. And it was fascinating to see him. He started his day early. He worked to early afternoon, took a nap, went back to work, and worked usually till 11 o'clock at night. I mean, and for all of us who didn't have the opportunity to take a nap or go home, I mean, our days frequently would start at 7 o'clock or so. And there were times when our days would end at 10. He believed in what he called can-do people, CANDO people. And from time to time, he would make a little bitty plaque and hand it to somebody that if you were a can-do person. But also, he would grade us. And I really didn't like the grading because he was constantly saying, "Oh, I know you can make an A+ on this project." And he did the same thing with his two daughters, Lucy and Linda, and they couldn't stand that either. But we all found ourselves trying to earn an A or an A+ in any project he might hand us.
Can you go ahead? I want to jump this, and can you tell the story of you were living in D.C. You and your wife, and one day the president was looking for you, and you had one car, and you left it at home for your wife, and you were on the bus.
Yes.
That just made me laugh. Can you tell that story about when you finally got to the White House? What happened?
Well, as sometimes would happen, we needed to keep the car at house for Edwina to be able to go shopping or to take the children to the doctor or whatever. And this was a day when I took the bus. And the White House operator called the house, called Edwina in the apartment, and she explained to the White House operator that Tom had already left and that she felt sure that he'd be there soon. And anyway, maybe a half hour later, the White House operator calls again and says, the president really needs Tom now. They needs to talk with him now. And Edwina explained that I had taken the bus. Well, I arrived that morning rather than before 8 or so. I think I may have arrived around 8:15, 8:20. The White House police officer at the gate said, Tom, you're to go directly to the president's bedroom. You don't go by your office. You go directly to the bedroom. So I went over. I knew by then he was really after me. So I walk in and he said, do you also bring a brown bag for lunch? And I said, no, Mr. President, I eat usually in the White House mess. And anyway, I took care of the issue that was an important issue for him. But that day is a real turning point in my life. I was making $7,500 a year, and I was supporting a wife and 2 children, and our situation was so tight that we were actually using some silver dollars that I had collected to buy milk for Wyatt. I would never have told that story incidentally, except I say it now so that people who are really short on money. But anyway, he adjusted me, doubled me to $15,000. But more than that, he assigned me a White House driver and car. Now, President Kennedy and the Kennedys had a large number of White House cars. LBJ thought that was excessive, so he had cut the number back to, I believe, eight total. And when I was given a White House car and driver, which also, of course, had the latest technology at that time as far as telecommunications, I was the envy of all the other White House aides. I mean, I caught hell from the other White House aides. What had I done to be able to earn this distinction? But LBJ would reward performance. He was very much a performance-driven person, and I guess I had learned early. I think I had learned early in high school and certainly at the University of Georgia that I might not be the smartest person in the room, but I could outwork anybody. It was just I saw that hard work at almost anything that I undertook would be recognized by the person overseeing my work or working around me. And it just became a part of my life. And I should tell you, because I've talked with 2 psychiatrists in recent years, and I said, I am still driven. And they said, well, Tom, the only way that we can get you to be less driven is to give you a frontal lobotomy.
It's too late for that, right?
Too late.
Wow. Yeah. Well, so let's back up. I was going to say, you make it a point of saying that LBJ could drive anybody as hard as he drove himself, but he also had a great heart. And I think that came through. Let's back up to growing up in Macon. I don't want to spend a lot of time there because your career is so fascinating, but you make it a point to talk in the first chapter about your mother and father. You're pretty frank about your father. And I wondered if you had ever been that frank before publicly about how you felt about him and about the kind of person he was.
That frank before publicly. Okay. I so wish now that I had a better relationship with my dad. I loved him, and I know he loved me. He had a 3rd grade education. My mother had a high school education. My dad was a guy that just never liked to work for any other person. I mean, he wanted the freedom to do whatever he would do whenever, but he also had bad health. And I attribute a good bit of that because he smoked Lucky Strikes around the clock, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and he consumed Maxwell House black coffee, or almost consumed it around the clock. And I really think, I know he died of a burst organ, which may very well have been a result of just and he was, and in his later life, he was very, very frail. But I wanted to do whatever I could do to take good care of my mother. She was a 6-day-a-week worker. And before I had my driver's license, she would even come down and pick me up at Macon Telegraph after she had worked a full day in a grocery store. I guess I'm ashamed to say that there were times when I really was ashamed that my dad didn't make more of himself. But as far as I know, he was not an alcoholic. As far as I know, he was not a philanderer. I also know because I know that he loved me, and I regret that I didn't that I didn't find ways to be more supportive, more helpful, it's just one of the few regrets I have in life. The biggest regret of my life is that by becoming a workaholic. I mean, I was out the door before my children often would get up and have breakfast. I would frequently not be home in the evenings until after they had gone to bed. Thank the good Lord, I had Edwina to look after them. But I so regret that I didn't. They both turned out fine, and thank God for Edwina that they did. But I do think that just giving so much of yourself to any profession or to any line of work is just, you really do need balance. And I led an unbalanced life for a good bit of it, just for reasons that I was determined to make it. Determined to make it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the first person that you mentioned in your book, mentors, people who deeply touched your life and set it on the trajectory that you took, was Peyton Anderson.
Yes.
You got a job while you were in high school, I think writing in sports.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about Peyton Anderson and the influence and what he did for you.
Peyton Anderson was the owner of the Macon Telegraph. He also, by today's standards, I mean, he was a very enlightened publisher, where many newspapers in the South were segregationists. His was not at all. I mean, he believed very much in civil rights. He was one of the first to really have a black section of the Macon paper, written by and edited by a black woman editor. He was a real leader in the community and supported good causes in the community. And I know this, that the editors, Jim Chapman, the managing editor, Sam Glassman, the sports editor, Bill Ott, the editor, another Grady graduate. I mean, they brought to Peyton, they conveyed to Peyton just information about me. And when I was called to his office as a high school junior and asked what my plans were, I told him that I'd hoped that I could get a college education, but I never mentioned one word about financial need on it. I do think the fact they saw my mother picking me up at night, they saw that the others that they had recommended to Peyton. And Peyton, said, if you can get into the University of Georgia, I'll provide a financial aid scholarship. Now, provided I worked on the weekends and that I worked on summers. And so much of the time in those 4 years, even though I had an active I was active in ROTC, I was active in my fraternity, I was active in other ways, I commuted to Macon and would try to leave on Friday early enough to get into Macon by 3. And I would leave usually after we put the paper to bed on Sunday night to get back to Athens. Um, and, I was not missing the weekend fun that everybody was having. I was enjoying working on the Macon Telegraph. I had fallen in love with journalism. And it really became a passion of mine, the passion of mine, the professional passion of mine.
So he really did set you on the path for the rest of your life.
Peyton, then when I'm finishing up at Georgia, I'm there for the weekend, and I'm told that he would like to meet with me. And he asked me once again, now, Tom, what are your plans for the future? And I said, well, Mr. Anderson, I really hope that one day I can become a publisher like you. And he said, in that case, you need a business degree. You don't need another journalism degree. I'd had an opportunity to go to Chapel Hill for a graduate program. He said, you don't need any more journalism. You've had plenty of that at the University of Georgia and plenty of that here. If you can get into Harvard Business School, I will pay your way. And I mean, it was like, I had not mentioned Harvard Business School. He said, I had always wanted, Peyton, had always wanted to go to Harvard Business School. So I was really floored this time when he said, I'll send you to the University of Georgia, financial aid scholarship, send you to Harvard Business School, financial aid scholarship. And I owe him not just for the funds he put behind me, but to give me the confidence that I could one day maybe become a publisher as he was.
And I think that you said you made a commitment to come back to Macon and go to work for him, and that was postponed. After you finished at Harvard, you applied. Now, tell the story of how you decided to apply for the White House, the inaugural, I believe, White House Fellows program.
Okay, I had a very definite commitment to go back to Macon. All my plans were to go back to Macon. Peyton had provided the scholarships at Georgia and at Harvard. He'd even sent me down to Princeton to study personnel management for a special course there, J.P. Cleaver, personnel testing. Anyway, Ed Winna read about this program called the White House Fellows. It was established in 1965. It was recommended to President Johnson by John Gardner, who of course, it was one of the truly great leaders of our time, and had been at Stanford, and he had been in President Johnson's cabinet. But anyway, I applied, and somehow, some way, I was chosen, remarkably, as the only Southerner that was chosen the first year. I came to a regional panel in Atlanta headed by Millsby Lane, and it had some leading Atlantans, Richard Rich. It had the then head of the Woodruff Foundation. Anyway, then I was chosen at the national level, and I'll never forget, one of the panelists was John Oakes of the New York Times. And we had been narrowed down from 3,000 to 45. And at the end of it, the 45 of us spent 3 days at the Airlie House in suburban Virginia being interviewed by this panel. The panel was headed by David Rockefeller, a Republican. But John Oakes of the New York Times, editor of the New York Times, was there. And at the end of it, he called me aside and he said, Tom, no, I was still Tommy. He said, I actually believe that one day you will become a publisher. And I'll never forget that. At the end of all of the interviews and everything went through, to have the editor of the New York Times say to me, Tommy, I think one day you will become the publisher. He didn't say of the New York Times, but a publisher. And that's a memory I'll never forget.
So when did LBJ have to write a letter or make a phone call? I can't remember which it was, to Peyton Anderson to say, can you give him up for a little while?
At the end of the fellowship year, 1966, I was supposed to return to Macon. And I had made it really clear that I was going to return to Macon. I was not lobbying to stay at the White House either. I mean, that would have been, I mean, that would almost been disloyal to Peyton and disloyal to have been, but anyway, Bill Moyes had talked with me about remaining, and I said, Bill, I can't. I must go back. Well, in any case, Peyton wrote this 2-page letter, the original of which you're going to have down in your archives, the original, not in Macon, where it should be, but down in Savannah. And it's a 2-pager. Basically, it ends at, from the President of the United States, Peyton Anderson, basically telling him that he needed me and that the nation needed me, and would he release me for my commitment to do it. Now, LBJ never asked me if it was okay to send that letter. Bill Moyes never asked me that he could send that letter. He sent that letter, and of course, Peyton wrote back, as you see in your archives, and said, Mr. President, how can I not? How can I turn that down? So I was given the freedom to remain at that point.
And Bill Moyers had chosen you to work with him as a White House fellow, which was another one of those turning points in your life.
Very much so. There were 15 of us chosen. Each one was to work with a member of the White House staff or a member of the cabinet or some of the positions like at the United Nations. Anyway, I'm sitting at a house in Macon in August of '65, and I get a phone call, and the White House operator says, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Moyes would like to talk with you. And Bill came on the line. He said, Tom, still call me Tommy. I've decided I'd like you to serve with me as my assistant. And he had been one of the 3 that I most wanted to serve with. Bill was just in his early 30s. I was barely turning 24. He had a publisher named Millard Cope in Texas that had been his mentor. So here's a young journalist with a background, not just in journalism, but he had also gotten his degree in religion. He was an ordained Baptist minister. But I was so lucky. And I should tell you, Stan, on day one, I arrived, and day one, I walk in, Bill's secretary meets me at the sort of the entrance to the White House on the west side of the White House, takes me into Bill's office. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. And then he said, well, I think I'd like to introduce, no, he said, I want to introduce you to some of the people around here. He then walked me into the Oval Office to meet LBJ. I mean, from driving in West Executive Drive, being met by Bill's secretary, and I'm next meeting with President Johnson, who says, Tom, at some point, that's a story in itself, but Tom, we do not have any experience with this program. It's a new program, and we just plan to treat you like a full-time member of the staff. And that floored me. And from that point on, I was really, even though I was in the category of a fellow or an intern, I mean, they did, in fact, treat me as a full-time. And so Bill was hauling me into meetings. Bill was sending me to replace him at various things. Bill was having me take notes. I probably somehow good luck, good fortune, but also I think you're measured on what you have achieved. And yet also, I think that the chemistry with Bill turned out just to be terrific. And I lost Bill this year. I'm giving a eulogy for him in Austin next month. I've worked on that thing like crazy. It's going to be short, but it's going to be one of the most powerful sets of remarks that I've ever given.
I thought about that as I was reading this. I thought he was still alive when you wrote this, and I know he's passed since then. And you also must have had a remarkable rapport with LBJ, because after Bill Moyers moved on to become a publisher, I think, of Long Island Newsday.
That's right.
You then sort of moved into his position, at least in regard to, if not in title, then certainly in regards to your closeness of working with the president. And you stayed on not only through January 1969, but then you went back to Texas. So talk to us now about working that closely with probably the best politician that's ever been in the White House and one of the most powerful personalities, certainly in the second half of the 20th century, Lyndon Baines Johnson. You worked with him up close. Personally, you got the full Johnson treatment. Some of the best photos in this book are you with Johnson. You're squared away in your 1960 suit. You got the nice haircut. You're wearing the glasses, and you're always attentive. You're always looking at him, and you were listening, and you were taking notes. What was all that like, Tom?
It is difficult for me to explain exactly how and why it happened. He told me that he'd always had great affection for Georgians, that along the way he had come to know Carl Vinson, who was chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Richard Russell, who was chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Walter George. He had a very good friendship with Georgians, and I do know that worked for the benefit of Georgia too, because having Richard Russell as chairman of the Senate Armed Services, Carl Vinson as chairman of House Armed Services, when it came time to decide where the building of this gigantic aircraft called the C-5A, the largest aircraft just about ever built in the world. At the time, it was built at Lockheed here in Georgia. And I came with President Johnson down for the dedication of it. But there were, I mean, I don't know how many military bases we had in Georgia but there was just and as I said earlier, he had a special relationship with Senator Russell. And through my time in the White House, if he really wanted me to conduct something in private between LBJ and Senator Russell, I was chosen. There was a big situation where Alexander Lawrence was Senator Russell's candidate to become a judge, and LBJ was opposing doing that because the then Attorney General Ramsey Clark and the then FBI found some areas that were not exactly enlightened positions that Judge Lawrence had. And LBJ came out basically against it. And it almost ended the lifetime relationship between LBJ and Russell on it. But, I think maybe LBJ saw in me some of his own history and growing up in a family with limited financial resources. I mean, he first learned about, I think, a lot about life when he was a teacher down at Cotulla, Texas, and saw young Mexican children come to school with sometimes no shoes and not having any breakfast or whatever. But I mean, LBJ had also been chosen by a member of the Texas delegation to come to Washington to work as a young aide to this Texas representative, who really was a wealthy guy, and he wasn't very much interested in running his own office. So he asked LBJ to run his office at a very young age. And so I don't know, Bill and LBJ provided me with responsibilities well above my pay grade. I mean, they had me advancing international trips in places like, on one occasion, Australia and New Zealand. I mean, on other cases, just placing big responsibilities on me, I think in part to see if I could handle them. Because big responsibilities have been placed on LBJ early. They've been placed on Bill Moyers early. And I think in many ways, they were placing them on me to see how well I could handle them.
Talk about the Tuesday lunches and taking notes.
LBJ did not trust all the members of the National Security Council, including, unfortunately, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey. You could not survive if you were known to be a leaker. or just talking too much.
Mhm.
So created was a Tuesday lunch when a highest classified type of information was discussed every Tuesday. It included the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, CIA Director Richard Helms, National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, later was Rostow, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Press Secretary, first Bill Moyers, then George Christian, and note taker. And I was chosen. I said to President Johnson, Mr. President, there are far more qualified people at CIA or at State Department or on the NSC staff to take these notes on it. I mean, I was sitting there. I was so focused on getting the notes right. Remember, there were no Sony Walkman. People say, Tom, you were literally taking notes in hand. And I said, yes. And I said, not only that, but LBJ sent me to speed writing school at 7 a.m. in the morning with two secretaries to learn not Greg shorthand, the real official shorthand, but speed writing, which is a less demanding. But I always remember that the word "the" is a dot. I mean, even now I can remember some of the abbreviations on it. But the Tuesday lunch was where the most important, most sensitive topics were discussed. They were not always Vietnam, but most of them Vietnam. But all of the relationships, our relationships with Russia, relationships, with countries around the world, and Stan, I was so focused on getting those notes right and getting them accurate, and then getting them typed. Get them out of my hand, but then getting them typed with a secretary named Connie Gerard, who's still around, who's maybe the fastest typist. But I had to have the same clearances as the CIA director. I had to have further fulfill investigations where they would go and talk with my neighbors, my friends, my family, schoolmates. I mean, they went and talked to people in Macon about me. The FBI did. I have my FBI file that was finally given to me after 30 years, and it's amazing. I got to see what everybody said about me, and nobody said a bad thing about me, which was really nice.
So you took those notes.
Was the most sensitive, and as I said, we all loved Vice President Humphrey. I don't know anybody on staff didn't love Vice President Humphrey, and LBJ loved Vice President Humphrey. But he just had a compulsive, he was one of the best people I've ever known. He just had a compulsive desire to tell everybody almost everything. Well, you almost talked about the Hubert Humphrey disease, and that's somebody who just doesn't know when to stop talking.
And then those notes were typed up, and then there was eyes only, right? And they went all the way to the top.
They were typed by Connie and went into the night reading. And what I got back after he read them, usually it was just a check or an LBJ that showed that he had read them. And not a single time did he correct me.
That was my next question.
Not a single time. But it was so interesting. On one occasion, the CIA director, Dick Helms, called me and said, Tom, I'd like to know exactly what was said at the lunch. I was there, but I want to get it. I said, Dick, I'm going to have to clear that with the president. He said, I understand. I said, you tell me what you want cleared. I will ask him now, this afternoon. And I had to go to the president to get cleared to tell him. Those notes never went to any place other than the White House. They didn't go, they're not in the Pentagon Papers. And until I got them released, and I know who's going to really love them, is he's gone through them page by page, is Robert Caro. But I've taken some of the real highlights of them. There are at least two in there that are blockbusters.
Did you feel nervous? Did you feel like the first time he asked you to do that and you sat down with those people around that table and you're the one who's responsible for taking accurate notes? Were you nervous? Was your hands shaking? Or had you been on the job by then long enough that you were just focused and didn't really think about the historical importance, the fact that 50 years later somebody was going to look at those?
I was so focused that I wasn't rattled. I was so focused on getting them right. and making sure that I got it right. And again, I could not take them all word for word. I was not a skilled shorthand person like the Reuters correspondents. The Reuters correspondents took Greg shorthand, and literally they would take everything. And the most professional secretaries at the time took Greg mostly. I took speed writing, and mine was just mostly abbreviations. But had I not done that each evening or each afternoon or evening, in addition to the other assignments that I had, there were days when I would look at something maybe 2 days later and I couldn't quite sort out what I had written.
Mm-hmm. Great picture in the book of you sitting at this table.
Yeah.
You got this from the LBJ Presidential Library. Walt Rostow is there at that time, but that is a powerful room. And as a young man from Georgia, right here on the end, taking notes, it's remarkable, really is.
And also, I was in the press office. Keep in mind that I was in the press office. I mean, I was being asked questions by reporters all the time, but I was really so careful to make sure that if I responded to if I knew the answer and knew the president had approved me giving the answer, I could do it. But very often I would just say, I do not have that answer. I will check and get back to you. Helen Thomas told me, she said, Tom, never lie. Never lie. She said, I have seen press secretaries here that just flat out lied. And it stuck with me. So if I could not answer the question, I would just say, I do not know the answer. And, you know, a lot of people don't like to say I don't know because somehow it makes you sound like you're not too smart. But if I didn't know the answer, I didn't try to wing it.
Mm-hmm. As I read through the book and being at the White House during those years must have been a sort of a postgraduate education all in and of itself. You became fluent in what was happening in foreign affairs and economic policy and civil rights legislation and how government worked. Did you bring that to bear? It's a silly question. You did, but were you able to bring all that to bear in your later positions that made you a better journalist 30 years later at CNN?
There is no question that my time as a White House fellow and my time working in public service with LBJ, both in the White House and in Texas, made me a far stronger editor, a far stronger publisher. I built personal contacts with people to whom I could turn over the years, particularly as we were trying to run circles around other news organizations. At CNN, run circles around the big networks and others. I mean, I could call Colin Powell, and he would help me, or Dick Helms, as long as he would like, and would help me. I don't think anybody ever gave me any classified information that would subject them to what I call it. But it was a powerful addition for me to have the Rolodex and the private numbers and over the years that I had, and also to have a better understanding. It also taught me the importance. LBJ sent me out into the field. And as I said, I mean, I was sent to a whole variety of places to advance trips and get to know people in places like Singapore and and all over Southeast Asia, South Vietnam, but to other places. I accompanied him to the funeral of Konrad Adenauer in Germany, but there were times when I was with him. I'll never forget riding in that helicopter over Washington, seeing the city of Washington, D.C. burning below us. And that photo is in there. That was one that I thought about it. And that is a time when I said, here I'm sitting with President of the United States, and it's almost total silence on the helicopter except for the rotor blades turning. But we were looking at smoke coming up from the nation's capital. And we're having to call in the National Guard and others after the assassination of Dr. King.
I'm assuming also that after those years at the White House, as you aged, as you grew, as you went on to work in newspaper and in broadcast media, You also were not intimidated by power and those in powerful positions because you had been at the elbow of the most powerful person in the world.
The only major figure that ever rattled me is Ted Turner. Ted wants an answer, and it must be accurate. It must be given to him almost immediately. If you try to smoke something by him, he will say, "You don't really know what you're talking about, do you, pal?" If you get those words come back to you, you don't really know what you're talking about. And let me tell you, my job was the news division. Terry McGurk had the sports division, and another executive had the entertainment division, but I had the news division. And I had to be knowledgeable about my division, about the ratings, about what was going on. And most days I had to be prepared for an 8 o'clock phone call. He might be in Moscow, he might be in Beijing, he might be in California, but it rattled me in a way that no other, and I don't think I've ever said this. You've heard, first person probably ever heard me say that. But Ted rattled me. Now, we became very good friends, and we never had a single fight. I was warned not to go to work for Ted Turner. Otis Chandler says, "Tom, Ted Turner is a nut." And but then I started talking to J.B. Fuqua, and I started talking to people, Jimmy Carter. I called Jane Fonda. I said, "Jane, tell me about Ted Turner." She said he's the most remarkable man I've ever known. But in any case, even now, I'm so sensitive when Ted's in really bad shape now. But I'll tell you, his love of, I mean, we could go on a half day about any one of these three. I mean, however much time you want to spend on any one of these three now or later, in it, but they were all quite different, but they were all had strong passions, very strong passions. And LBJ wanted to make it a better country, particularly for the poor. Otis Chandler wanted the LA Times to be as good as the New York Times. I mean, absolutely wanted it to be as good as. And Ted Turner wanted, his exact words to me, "Tom, I want CNN to be the best news organization on the planet." And I said, "What else, Ted?" He said, "That's it. That's it. I want CNN to be the best news organization on the planet."
Before we leave LBJ, I want to tell the people listening, you have to see the cover of this book. What I'm referring to, you won't be able to see, but there's a photograph here of Tom Johnson being pulled forward by the lapels by President Johnson. The occasion was a summit meeting in New Jersey between the Soviet Glassboro, New Jersey, I think in 1967, between the premier of the Soviet Union and the president of the United States. And it looks as if Tom Johnson is being conferred with by LBJ and maybe even the Soviet premier. Tell us, this is probably my favorite photo, because as much as what it says of you, your face is emotionless. You are listening. You're betraying not a single thought in your head. And everybody who's seen or read about LBJ, you can just fill in a word bubble. Tell the story of that picture, if you will, Tom.
Well, between LBJ and Tom Johnson is Kosygin, then supreme leader of the Soviets, and I am there in sort of a plastic rain jacket because it had been a slight bit of rain, and LBJ is reaching out and is grabbing me with his right hand, my lapel, and it almost felt like he was sort of picking me up almost. But LBJ had brought the leader of the Soviet Union out from this major summit conference to tell the world what had been achieved at that meeting. It was colossal. The Russians had said they also wanted to get out of Vietnam. They were pouring a lot of men and money and everything else into Vietnam, and we were losing thousands and thousands of men and materials and money. But anyway, the photographers about 50 yards away, maybe 40 yards away, were making so much noise with their shutters of the still cameras and with the rolling 16 millimeter film cameras and just a lot of talking that they were having between them, the noise coming from the press area was so great that LBJ just was about to start talking, and he just stopped. And then he looked straight out and saw me standing out there. And with two fingers, he basically sort of summoned me up. So I briskly run out of that press area up to him and run to him. And that's when he grabs me and pulls me sort of up close, making damn sure that I could hear. He said, "Tom, if the goddamn photographers don't stop shooting, I am going to take him back inside." Now, to make it clear, he was not talking shooting a weapon. He was talking about shooting their cameras, rolling their cameras, making that noise. And I said, "Yes, sir." So I go briskly back out there, and basically with hand motions, I just said, "Guys, you got to quiet down." And there was almost something magical. They must have all seen me summoned up there into what was the midst of a huge to-be news conference between the leader of the Soviet Union and the leader of America. And when I did like this, so guys, you got to go, they went instantly silent. They stopped their flash. They stopped hitting their just everything and listen. And so LBJ continued. And the part that I still love the most is, I guess it was the AP or one of the news organizations sent a photo out, says LBJ interrupts Glassboro summit to confer with key aide Tom Johnson. When in fact, he was basically chewing my ass out to tell me to get up to. And I should also say that was a one time that President Johnson, he didn't ask me many foreign policy or substantive questions, but he asked me, should he go ahead with this meeting? The Russians did not want him, Kosygin, to come down from New York, where he was attending the United Nations. And the American side did not want LBJ to fly to New York. So President Johnson was in his bedroom with a Gulf oil map and a standard 12-inch ruler with his head of military affairs, General James U. Cross. And they were looking at the distance between New York and Washington, D.C., and right in the middle, at the 6-inch line, was this university and that little town of Glassboro. And that's how it came to be. The Soviets were willing to go halfway, and we were willing to go halfway. And I always thought about what nonsense. I mean, the idea of doing this, but also he asked me, and I one pager that I put in the book, urging him to go forward with it because I'm President, even if it's a failure, it'll show that we've gone the last mile in trying to bring about peace in Vietnam.
Before I leave him completely and we move on into the rest of your journalism career, I just want to ask you, you spent a lot of time with LBJ, and times I know when it was just the two of you in the room, reviewing documents, talking, whatever. What was he like that up close, and what is your lasting memory of him?
Well, I love the old man. He had a lot of faults, but he was determined to do what he could when he had the power to do it, to make America a better country, particularly for the poor, for the blacks, for those that are homeless, those who are unemployed, those who I mean, and that's why we created Head Start and Job Corps and fought against the medical community to pass Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, the entire American Medical Association was lined up against the Medicare and Medicaid on it. But that same powerful man who wanted to do so much, and it was described as the Great Society, but he also oversaw the significant expansion of our commitment to Vietnam. He the thousands of Americans who were killed and whose names are on that Vietnam Wall in Washington, but the thousands who were severely injured, whether it was just emotionally, many people came back broken from it. But also 2 million Vietnamese died, and South and North Vietnamese died. So on one hand, there's this man who has been so successful as a member of the Congress, of Senate Majority Leader, Vice President of the United States, leader of the space program, which doesn't get the attention that it does. President Kennedy announced it, but LBJ took it to the completion. He was there, and even President Nixon said, "Lyndon, your name should be on that plaque on the moon, not my man, not my name." But I mean, but also though, we should have done more. We should have done more to get out of there sooner. But President Lee Kuan Yew down in Singapore said, "Mr. President, if you don't stop communism in Vietnam, it's going to sweep all the way down to my country, and it's going to sweep over Malaysia and all the other." That was the so-called domino theory, and he said, "We signed the SEATO Treaty. We are a member of the SEATO Treaty, a signatory, and it binds us to come to the aid of any country that is attacked." And of course, the North Vietnamese attacked us. But
what attracted you to the next person in your triumvirate, Otis Chandler? You went to work for him first with the Dallas Times Herald. Then you went to the Los Angeles Times, which, as I mentioned, when I first heard about you in 1984, 85, you were the publisher of the LA Times. You were a Grady grad, and we were all told, Grady grads go out and do things in the world. And you were working for Otis Chandler. What does he tell us about him? Another gigantic personality.
President Johnson and Mrs. Johnson owned a cable system in Austin, Texas. They also owned the CBS affiliate in Austin, Texas. The Federal Communications Commission would not permit an entity, an organization to own both. They had a mandate to sell either the cable system or the television station. One of LBJ's most trusted friends, Jack Lenny, who was then head of the Motion Picture Association, told Otis Chandler and a couple of others of his friends at the Times Mirror Company of the possibility that LBJ would sell KTVC television, the CBS affiliate there. Otis Chandler and a small team of people from the Times Mirror Company flew to Austin and met with LBJ. I was one of 3 people on the sales side, but my job was to have all the paperwork, all the financials, everything, that the trend lines and everything, subscriber, advertiser growth, staff, the works. And at one point, we had a reception for maybe 100 advertisers and leaders in Texas, so that we could introduce to Texas Otis Chandler and his group. And I was chosen to introduce everybody. And I stood first in line. I had always an incredible memory, don't have it as well now, but I was able to introduce not just by name, but usually by their business. For example, I would say, "Mr. Chandler, this is Roy Butler and his wife Ann. He is the former mayor of Austin, but they are among the biggest advertisers you have. He owns one of the beer distributing companies here, and he also owns the Ford Motor dealership here." But I was able to do that all the way down. And later, Chandler said to the team that he was traveling, he says, "I've never seen anything like that in my life." Now, I just have to say I had a gift of a memory like that. Plus, I had really, really, really worked. If I'd learned anything from LBJ, to learn the name of everybody and their wives and their mistresses or whatever about everybody. I mean, he just felt like if you really are going to be successful. So next thing I know, Otis says, "Tom, what do you plan to do after we by the TV station. I said, well, Mr. Chandler, I plan to go back to my own profession. I have an offer from Knight Ridder, the Macon paper, to go back there. And he said, well, before you make that decision, said, give me a couple of weeks. I'd like to come back and meet you. And so he left and came back, and he laid out a plan for me that I still think is almost too good to be believed. His plan was, if you will stay here in Austin as president of the TV station until the license is transferred from the Johnson family to the Times Mirror Company, I would like you to do one of two things. Move to Dallas as the editor of the Dallas paper, or come to Los Angeles as like my aide, so that you learn everything there. And then, if it works out well for you as editor of the Dallas paper, we will name you publisher of the Dallas paper, something you've always wanted to do. You've always wanted. Peyton has told me. So if it works out well, I'll name you publisher. And if that works out well, I'm going to bring you to Los Angeles as president of the LA Times, 3 years. And if that works out, I'm going to name you publisher of the Los Angeles Times, the first non-channel. Now, every word I have just said to you, Stan, is as truthful as I could possibly make it. He has described a plan that includes me staying briefly for a period of time in Austin, then going as editor in Dallas, then becoming publisher in Dallas, then becoming president of the LA Times. And if that worked out, I'd become the first non-channel. And he and the board of Times Mirror delivered on every single one of those steps unanimously. There was not a vote against me, I am told, in the room for all of those, because I went on the board of the Dallas paper. Then later I went on the board of the Times Mirror paper. So, I mean, it was almost too good to be true, but it was. And but it was all performance driven. It was totally performance driven. I mean,
you weren't just skating by on your good looks at that point.
No.
You were working hard. Those are the years I know that you in Dallas, you talked about, putting in the hard work of the things you were trying to do, competing with the other Dallas newspaper, and then getting out to Los Angeles. What was that like for you culturally to go out to a place like Los Angeles when you'd been not just a Georgia person, but East Coast, and putting in the work out there back in newspapers after being gone for a while?
Okay. Time magazine did a cover article on newspapers, named the Dallas Times Herald one of the five finest, and we gained so much in circulation, we gained so much in revenues, we gained so much in honors. We were just absolutely cleaning the clock of the Dallas Morning News. And Otis couldn't wait almost to get me to come on out, because he felt that the Times was in need of some of that same revitalization in a way. I loved Austin. So did Edwina. I loved Dallas. Edwina loved Dallas, not quite as much as Austin, but then would go to LA, and Edwina just falls in love with Los Angeles. You could drop a seed. She's very much into flowers and plants. You can drop a seed out there and it grows. And also, if you could be at the beach in an hour, you could be at the mountains for an hour. You could, and it was just unbelievable. And I had a pope position, a pope, P-O-P-E position almost. When you publish at LA Times, it's one of the 3 to 5 most important jobs there. You have the very best seats at the Music Center, the very best seats at the Dodgers. You've got you've got the highest expectations of just continuing it. And thank goodness for my time in Austin, my time in Dallas, my time they were like golden years. I mean, the economy was booming, and here again, I'm working for somebody, as I did with Ted, that just wanted it to be the best that we could make it. And I had the authority to recruit the best people and to expand and put more suburban bureaus in, and it was just an astonishingly good time. And it was really only after some change in the top of the Times Mirror Company, particularly when Otis deciding to retire. He had worked on an internship program for 7 years. Then he had been publisher of the Times for 20 years, and then he was going to be a chairman of the parent company. But Otis and I we almost thought alike on human issues. I mean, yes, we were far more of a liberal paper on such things as air quality and water quality and minority rights, and I mean all of the things like that. But some of the older channelers thought that we were becoming too liberal for them. And I know the names because look, I sat in the room as a board member. They didn't hide it from me. I mean, and also that our 32% profit margins or something were not as high as some of Gannett's. Of course, Gannett had no competing newspapers anywhere. They only owned. So when Otis basically took himself out of power, I could see then that it was time for me to look outside. And I had always dreamed of coming back home somehow. And Jack Tarver had offered me a job to come here as editor to replace Reg Murphy at half of my salary in Dallas. Jack Tarver asked me to come back to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was a wonderful job, editor. I mean, to come there, the job that Ralph McGill had once held, but the offer was one half of what they were paying me in Dallas. Couldn't quite do that.
And you mentioned liberal paper, and that was also, of course, during the period when there's a certain Republican from California was president, also, and so you had to cover him.
I must tell you, for one thing, I've always felt you really need to build relationships, even with people with whom you disagree. That you need to be open to having good relations with people whose policies are different. And anyway, I mean, I've made a lot of friends with the Nixons. I mean, I mentioned how President Nixon told me that plaque on the moon should have LBJ's name on it, not his. But also in the 4 years that President Johnson was out of office, there was never an occasion that we needed anything, whether it was a jet star coming down on Friday to bring classified papers so that President Johnson could be briefed on Vietnam, or whether it was flying a 707 over to pick him up, to take him to the launch of the mission that put a man on the moon, or anything else. And President Nixon would call me sometimes and just say, "Tom, how's Lyndon?" And I would tell him. Now immediately I'd call President Johnson and I would urge President Nixon, let me just transfer you on it. But then I'd had good friends with the Ford people, and then after I got out to Reagan, they would set me by Ronald Reagan twice. They set me at these dinners because they wanted me to get to know Ronald Reagan. I was published in the LA Times, and I was seated at dinner twice, and I got to meet Mike. I got to know Mike Deaver, and I got to know a lot of the people around him. And in fact, I helped the man that he picked to become his executive assistant, Fred Ryan, to become his executive assistant when he returned to California. Had that same role for LBJ. So I sort of gave him a tutorial on what it's like to bring a former president home. And we remained friends in it. I so wish we could bring back a spirit of bipartisanship and deal with some of these urgent issues that we have, like Ukraine and the Middle East and immigration. I mean, LBJ so believed in bipartisanship. When he had a major problem, his first call would always go to Everett Dirksen.
Yep. It's remarkable. And I know you've probably listened to those released White House tapes that Michael Beschloss has edited and they put out in the audio version is fascinating because he's calling across the aisle. He's working with people. I mean, as you said, a politician of the first order in a way
Well,
that
they would
few
sit
are.
down together and maybe have 1, 2, or 3 beverages, alcoholic beverages together and talk through issues. And I was in the room with him several times as the only guy there. I mean, I'll never forget sitting in the room with LBJ and Reverend Dirksen. LBJ needed the Dirksen's vote on an important bill. Dirksen needed a veterans center built in his district in Ohio. LBJ it was horse trading at its finest. LBJ and he were talking. They were probably both on their second beverage. And LBJ said, well, Irv, I cannot do that. I just can't do that veteran center in your district. Austin, there are more veterans that live around Austin. It's much less expensive to build that veteran center than Austin. I mean, he went down the list and Senator Dirksen said, now, Lyndon, don't do that to me. Don't do that to me. Well, Dirksen had come out in opposition to this bill. On Monday, Dirksen reverses himself, comes out for the bill, and the reporter said, Senator, on Friday, you came out against this powerfully. He said, how did you do that? And Dirksen said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a wiser man today than I was last Friday. He, of course, gets his veteran center, and LBJ gets not just Dirksen's vote, but all Republicans needed to pass it. That was the reality of life. Now, that's horse trading. I don't think there was anything unethical about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And to his credit, Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were bipartisan. Yes. Certainly something that would not have happened today. You mentioned Ted Turner. Let's get on to him and CNN. You come back to Atlanta, you take over CNN. It's been around for about 10 years at that time, derided often as a chicken noodle network, as you know. You took that, and Ted Turner, y'all took it to new heights, particularly after the Iraq War and Baghdad. What happened over there? You were at the helm when all of that went down.
The originals, Burt Reinhardt, the original with Ted, who founded CNN in 1980 to 1990, had done an absolutely brilliant job of establishing it, of building subscribers, of building a network of just unbelievable strength around the United States, and had just begun. After Ted had visited with Fidel and saw him watching CNN, had just begun its international expansion. So, and I say this in as absolute honesty as I can say anything, the original team that Ted brought to Atlanta and helped put not just CNN, but also put headline news on the air and got the distribution and worked with the cable operators and was able to put CNN on the satellite. Those founders, and people are going to say, well, Tom is saying that for some political reasons. I'm not. Those original founders did an incredible job. Now, Burt Reinhardt, the president, was coming up on age 70. And Ted felt it was time to prepare for the next decade or so. There were 4 internal candidates, and Ted had also said that he would never pick a newspaper guy, said that publicly, never pick a newspaper guy. Anyway, a very good friend of mine, Jerry Lindauer, who was a friend of Ted, Jerry was head of the National Cable Television Association, a former combat Marine. But he also, I told Jerry that I thought maybe it was time for me to think about, I'd already put in 17 years, that maybe it's time for me to think about moving on. And he said, Ted, have you thought about Tom Johnson? And Ted said, do you think he would take it? So I get a phone call and Ted said, would you take the job as president of CNN? And I said, Ted, I need time to think about it. You need to know me better. I need to know you better. And he said, well, what about Monday? And that was a Thursday. And I finally had to tell that, the head of his HR department that I would need more time than that. But I talked with Ted personally. I mentioned earlier that I talked with others here in Atlanta, including President Carter, including J.B. Fuqua, including Roberto Goizueta at Coca-Cola, including some others who knew him and called Jane Fonda, who said he's the most remarkable man I've ever met. They were dating at that point. Anyway, I also talked to personal friends in the television world, Bill Moyers and Walter Cronkite. And I must tell you, everybody except Otis Chandler said, you really ought to take that job. And there were other offers. There were other very good offers. But this one just seemed to be, for me, just an incredibly exciting time. Now, I should also tell you, after I was removed as publisher of the LA Times, I went into a deep depression. I went into a depression where I seriously thought about suicide. I gave my guns. I'd always loved to hunt and fish when I was in Georgia and in Texas. I gave them to Jim Boswell, my head of human resources at the LA Times, to keep for me till I get through that. Because I think if you have a weapon, very convenient, easy to reach, if you really spontaneously say, I'm going to kill myself and a pistol's nearby, you might just do it. That's one of my points about guns, is to keep them where they're locked and you just can't easily access them, or a child can access. Well, anyway, I accepted Ted's offer. And I think a combination of this extraordinarily exciting new position and a psychiatrist who basically took everything that I was advised to do at UCLA and changed that. And I think I just started coming up and out of my depression. And I think too much of me was being, in a big title position, publisher of the LA Times. You can't get much bigger than that. But in the media world, but also coming here was just, it was exhilarating. And I was helped so much by Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait on day 2 of it. And I must tell you, we were just, I went up to see Ted. I said, Ted, you have said you want CNN to be the best news network on the planet. We believe, in fact, Secretary of State Jim Baker had been meeting with Tariq Aziz, and they came to no resolution about having the Iraqis withdraw from Kuwait. And it looked to us that the war seemed to be inevitable. But I said, Ted, if we are going to really own the coverage, I've got to be able to put in portable ground stations. I've got to be able to put in staff into the region. I've got to be able to do whatever we can do. And he told me, he said, how much will it cost? And I said, Ted, it could cost as much as $30 million over budget, maybe more. His exact words, precise words, Tom, he called me pal. I don't think he's ever called me Tom. You spend whatever you think it takes, pal. So I went back and told the head of satellites and the splendid head of CNN and all of our coverage, Easton Jordan, go and book the transponder. I mean, get everything we need to do. So we just went ahead and we bought up, we leased up, we put people in position. And when the other guys came along to try to start getting themselves prepared, we already had leased it, or we already had bought it, and it was. I have a lot of respect for my competitors. It's very hard. The only competitor that I've never had much respect for has been Fox News. They have a lot. They've had a lot of terrific journalists, but it's really been it's a different form of journalism there than the kind I practice. But in any case, when the first bombs came down, every other network and anybody that depended on electricity or power, they all went dark. Well, we had a separate line, a so-called four wire out of the Al Rashid Hotel back in and up, and we're the only ones broadcasting. At least we're broadcasting. We had audio for the first several hours, days of it, but it was an example of Ted. You spend whatever you think it takes, pal. And I want it to be the best news network on the planet. He really meant it.
And reporters became superstars and still legendary, right? I mean, the people who were there, Bernard Shaw and John Holloman and Peter Arnett, and I think Christiane Amanpour was part of the team at that time. Just incredible reporting. Everybody turned it on every night. It really made CNN, did it not? I mean, it took it to a place that maybe they'd wanted it to be, but it wasn't there. But you got it there. I mean, as you say, you reacted to the moment. You were in charge. You made those decisions.
It was every time I try to make this point, I try to make it with just the most complete honesty. It was a group of us. They even had to teach me the new technology. The last time I'd had any real television training was with KTV television in Austin, Texas for 2 years. I said, guys, look, I am new, and I knew Ed Turner came to me. Ed was the head of news, CNN, and he said to me, Tom, Ted should have picked me, meaning Ed Turner, but he didn't. He picked you. So I just want to tell you, you'll never have a more loyal guy working for you than you do in me, meaning Ed, and most of my senior executives were just terrific. Not all, but there were a couple that were very disappointed. Lou Dobbs, I don't think ever got over it.
You eventually went over to Fox News, right? As I recall.
Yes.
Tom, I want to be mindful of your time. I've taken up a lot of it. There's a lot of things in here that we haven't talked about. You touched on your battles with depression. You are very frank and candid in this book about depression, the toll it takes on you and has taken on you and the people around you. There's a lot more in the book about that. You talk about the current state of broadcasting and journalism and politics. That's also there. You talk about your family in particular with great warmth and everything they've meant to you. There's a lot more in this book than we've been able to talk about.
Stan, one message, though, I would like to convey to anybody. Depression is a treatable illness. Don't kill yourself. Depression is a treatable illness. There are meds today. There are treatments today that will enable you to get better. And I just so hope that anybody that is really in a bad place with depression will get to a professional or to somebody that has experienced it, such as me. But I really want people to, if who are out there listening to this, who are in a bad place, that just know that there are ways that they can get better, and if they don't have anybody else to turn to, call me.
And you mean that?
I do.
My thanks to Tom Johnson for joining me on this podcast. You can find out more about his book at ugapress.org. The hardest working producer and engineer in show business, the producer of this podcast, as well as the czar of our Tallahassee office, is our very own and indispensable Brendan Cannonball Krellin. You can find our podcast anywhere you can find podcasts, including YouTube and YouTube Music. You can also find Off the Beaten Path on the podcast app on your phone, and I would ask you to please leave a review on the Apple Podcast app, which would be most appreciated. Be sure and like Off the Beaten Path on Facebook as well. Learn everything about the Georgia Historical Society at georgiahistory.com and the Georgia History Festival at georgiahistoryfestival.org. Please also visit the official Off the Beaten Path website at deatonpath.georgiahistory.com and check out my videos, my blog, and similar podcasts with great writers like this one. Stay safe, stay strong. I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. As always, thank you for listening.